Hello and welcome to this on-demand webinar, Type 1 Diabetes Healthcare Professional Talking Points. My name is Daniel Jin. I'm the CEO and founder of Creation, a company which specializes in listening to healthcare professionals' online conversations and developing practical insights for healthcare engagement. What I'm going to do is to give you some orientation to two reports that we've made available free of charge on type 1 diabetes, healthcare professional conversations taking place in the UK, and then a separate report on healthcare professional conversations taking place online in Spain, with a view to understanding what are the needs, interests of healthcare professionals in those two markets and what can we learn from their online conversations. These reports are made available free of charge, so if you don't have your copy already, then do get in touch and we'll make sure that you've got hold of one. What I'm going to do in this session is to give you some orientation. I'll focus on some of the key highlights. They're quite extensive reports, so I shall focus on the key highlights, show you some of the data from primarily the UK, but a little bit of the Spain data as well, so you get a sense of what's in there and really get a sense of how to use, or how I would use, these reports really. Just to give you a little sneak preview of something else that's available, and just to not confuse the two, we're also doing a deep dive, we call a Creation Deep Dive report on type 2 diabetes. This is a product which is available commercially. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on, and that's an extensive study in the UK only at this stage of a massive amount of data of healthcare professionals talking about type 2 diabetes treatments and systems and so on. But for now, let's focus on the type 1 diabetes report, which is available for you. Just to give you a bit more background on the vision, we actually produce these reports in collaboration with healthcare professionals who have really actively engaged in the process and also been sharing quite actively some of the findings as they, I suppose, have really been looking to continue learning from each other, which is the reason they tell us they're using public social media in the first place. We started data over the course of a one-year period from late 2015 to late 2016. And that's a lot of data actually in both markets, as you'll see from some of the previews that you're going to see in a moment. All the data comes from posts by healthcare professionals on open public platforms. So public social media platforms like Twitter, like healthcare professionals' blogs, like other social media platforms. Everything that's referenced in here is available, to the public via a web browser or social media application. Just one note on the methodology before we get into the data itself. We have a proprietary technology platform called Creation Pinpoint, and what it does, it's a massive and constantly growing database of about currently 500,000 healthcare professionals' public social media profiles. When a healthcare professional says anything online on public social media, we're tracking that so that we can analyze it and build it into our data set, so we can really build a clear picture of what healthcare professionals are thinking and saying, if you like, or through their public social media posts. When the system that we have finds what it thinks is a healthcare professional using its machine learning algorithms, it sends that over to one of our data quality analysts who review that manually and verify that, yes, we do believe also that it's a healthcare professional, and that gives us our data set that we then listen to. So let's have a look. This is from the table of contents in the study report for the UK. Really, the UK and Spain reports run in parallel, so they're looking at these kinds of things. What can we learn about unmet needs or interests among healthcare professionals who are talking about type 1 diabetes online? We're looking at how healthcare professionals engage. Do patients feature in their conversation? The answer is, I'll cut to the chase, yes they do, so we'll take a bit of a look at that. And what are healthcare professionals thinking about new technologies and treatments? And then we do a bit of an analysis on the top healthcare professionals in the conversation, and I'll show you some of those profiles in the UK and Spain, so you can actually get a sense of what you'll see in the full report too. So first of all, what can we learn about unmet needs or interests among healthcare professionals who talk about type 1 diabetes online? Well, this is the sort of summary page from the UK study, and we focused in on 4 key areas that we saw in the conversation among healthcare professionals. Patient concern. There was a real sense of healthcare professionals being interested in talking about their concern for patients. There was a fair bit of conversation about the NHS and health systems in the UK. Some conversation about awareness, and particularly awareness of the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and a desire to raise public awareness as well as provide resources and tools for patients to develop their own awareness too. And then we saw events featuring significantly in the healthcare professional online conversation, and one in particular that stood out was an event called TAD Talk, Talk About Diabetes, where we saw healthcare professionals engaging at the event and subsequently during the event engaging online. So what can we learn about the unmet needs or interests among healthcare professionals who are talking about type 1 diabetes online? This word cloud is a summary, if you like, of all the data in the study. And what it's done is it's shown the larger words here represent those words that are used more frequently in all the healthcare professional conversation. So we can see some themes rapidly jumping out. But let's drill down into some specific themes in that conversation. Some of the words on that topic cloud relate to the NHS. We see obviously the word NHS there, Fab NHS staff. We see NHS England there upside down at the top. And DKA, which relates to a particular theme of conversation around the NHS, as we shall see shortly. Let's take a look at some of the data specifically. Among our analysis of healthcare professional conversation around the NHS, we looked at where we could very specifically see either positive or negative sentiment or attitudes towards the NHS relating to diabetes treatments. It was interesting that among the positive conversation, there were quite a lot of posts that were resharing, retweeting the posts of patients and carers who were thanking the NHS for the way they had cared for them or their relatives, to save their lives and so on. So a lot of positive feeling. And when patients shared that, we saw healthcare professionals then resharing, reposting it and so on. Other positive sentiment related to the availability of good resources and so on. When we looked at the negative sentiment, and there was a similar amount of conversation, slightly less negative sentiment towards the NHS, one theme, one topic really stood out, and that was this, well, you see it summarised here on the top left there in Partha Carr's tweet. Partha Carr is an endocrinologist in the UK, and he says there is more chance of having a DKA inside an NHS hospital than outside. And it's really, I suppose, a call to improve the systems that we have in the NHS, in NHS hospitals. And then you see other sort of negative comments about NHS patient care and interaction with patients and so on as part of the system itself. Other topics that were being discussed in relation to the NHS by healthcare professionals included significantly a petition to make continuous glucose monitors available on the NHS for type 1 diabetics, for people with type 1 diabetes. And you can see on this little screen grab down here that at the point when we captured it, 27,000 signatures have been added. But actually, healthcare professionals played a part in getting this out there to encourage people, other people, to sign up and play an active role in helping to shape policy around continuous glucose monitors. We also saw other kind of examples here of healthcare professional concerns relating to the NHS and prescribing budget. We see some things about patient interaction and so on. Scaring people does not work. And yeah, the petition on the left-hand side there, again, as you saw already, was referenced by a number of healthcare professionals. Let's take a look back at the topic cloud of all the conversation, and we'll drill down into one more topic here. Second kind of key topic to note is awareness. These words relate to awareness. There's a comic upside down there, comic book, the word awareness, the word resources, sort of words that were being used by healthcare professionals to talk about awareness raising of type 1 diabetes. There's this spike of activity here towards the end of the year. So this is a timeline of conversation by healthcare professionals specifically mentioning awareness-related topics. And we see various spikes, but there's a big one there in October where there was a release of a comic book that was designed to educate the public about type 1 diabetes and for sharing with patients and so on as well. And that was shared a lot by healthcare professionals. In fact, when we look at all the key sort of awareness-raising campaigns that we saw, the 5 most shared by healthcare professionals during the study period, which are shown here in the pie chart, and between them were shared 574 times. We see the Type 1 Origins comic. We also see Ninjabetics blog in there. We see the JDRF and various other resources as being key resources that were being shared by healthcare professionals to support patients or the public in raising awareness. There are several reasons why healthcare professionals might want to raise awareness of type 1 diabetes. One reason that is really evident from the online conversations of healthcare professionals is that there's often a lack of understanding of the differences between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Now, healthcare professionals can be seen here interacting both with healthcare professionals, their peers if you like, and also with non-healthcare professionals to discuss and respond and inform about the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. See some frustration in their conversations sometimes as well. Another reason that healthcare professionals kind of really make efforts to raise awareness is to sort of disassociate type 1 diabetes from kind of lifestyle related stigma that might exist around type 2 diabetes. And some healthcare professionals are really very direct in the way that they communicate their opinions. As you can see here, it's a conversation between endocrinologist Partha Carr, and you can see the way the response is here. Let's be categorical. Healthy lifestyle does not prevent type 1 diabetes. So we see this kind of frustration coming out sometimes. Let's take a look at conversation topics that we saw in the discussion among healthcare professionals in Spain. So this is in the Spain report specifically. One of the topics that really stood out there, which has been translated here into the English language. We saw, incidentally, healthcare professionals in Spain using both Spanish and English language. And here we see words like delivery and insulin in both languages, actually. Of the total sort of insulin-related therapy conversation in type 1 diabetes, 28% of mentions named a specific therapy, insulin therapy. And that 28% was made up of 7 different therapies, as can be seen in the pie chart here. We've sort of broken it down. You can see the share of voice of different insulin treatments. There was a reasonable amount of conversation in Spain about insulin pumps as well. So 20% of the insulin-related conversation specifically was about pumps. And we can see here different things being shared. Some of these posts that originated outside of Spain that were then reshared by healthcare professionals in Spain, hence they're in the Spain study. Let's take a bit of a look at how healthcare professionals are actually engaging online, the sort of behaviours that we're seeing among them. A couple of examples from the reports. One is the use of hashtags. The way they will use a hashtag is a hash sign followed by a word, which is a way to group conversation together, usually on something like Twitter, and often used to draw attention to conferences, congresses, themes around type 1 diabetes and so on. And then we'll look at the sites that healthcare professionals are engaging with online most. When we look at hashtags, it's interesting that there are some core hashtags used by healthcare professionals and of course others as well to talk about type 1 diabetes. So we see hashtag T1D, it's the blue line running along here, it's very popular. And we see Talk 1, Type 1 diabetes. And one big spike there, which goes off the scale, so we've just marked it there, TAD Talk 2016. So in a short period of time, a massive spike from conversation relating to that event specifically. In Spain, the data shows that hashtag diabetes and hashtag diabetes ESP really relating to sort of Spanish-specific conversation about diabetes were the most popular hashtags. You'll see there in the slightly orange color, those hashtags that relate to Congress meetings specifically rather than other topics. So if you look at hashtag T1D, for example, it's only the 4th largest, most used hashtag. It's not really used a huge amount at all in the Spanish HCP conversation, whereas it's used a lot in the UK conversation. But diabetes ESP is very popular. And it's interesting to note that Spanish healthcare professionals really find themselves sometimes talking about content or topics that they would consider to relate to Spain specifically, and sometimes talking about content or topics that relate to the international community of peers possibly they might have. And that often relates to or equates to when they would choose to use Spanish versus English language as well, depending on whether they feel they're having a local market conversation or an international conversation. Let's take a look at the sites that healthcare professionals are engaging with online or really sharing with their peers. And this is really the number of times that healthcare professionals have shared resources or links to other platforms. This one here relates to the UK study. And we see that it's quite interesting to note that the BBC is the most referenced site out of any platforms in the UK, more than diabetes.org.uk, diabetes.co.uk, more than the British Medical Journal or any other single medical platform, if you like. Mainstream news site BBC has a lot of credibility among UK healthcare professionals and is shared quite actively. But also on there, a number of other sources. So Diabetes UK, you can see here some of the top pages that are shared from that by healthcare professionals. And also bloggers, so healthcare professionals who run blogs, quite a number of them are using Blogger. So we see Ninjabetic, there's a Laura Cleverly, is actually a patient with diabetes who's also a healthcare professional now. And then we see Partha Car's blog, also very actively shared by other healthcare professionals. In Spain, we see Blogger as the most shared platform. So in fact, other sources and news sources we do see down there. We see El Mundo, so some local market news sources, as well as international medical sources and journals. The British Medical Journal is in there as well, further down the line. But blog content is more likely to be shared than any other platform. So we see again Blogger really sort of coming up there. And when we break this down, look at some of the sorts of conversations, it's quite interesting to see from the content that healthcare professionals are sharing in Spain, the sorts of topics that are quite interesting to them, that they see as being quite relevant. So changes in diabetes in new European guidelines for heart failure was a YouTube video which was shared quite a lot by healthcare professionals, and diabetes and nutrition advice in there as well, and how to prevent diabetes and look at mealtime. So YouTube being quite popular for sharing content among healthcare professionals in Spain. It's interesting to see these sort of digital behaviours and to learn from them and to see the things that are stimulating conversation in each market. It's not the same in the UK as it is in Spain necessarily, although there are similarities. One of the questions which came up when we were planning this research with healthcare professionals was the question of how do patients feature in the healthcare professional online conversation. And I think that, if you like, the healthcare professionals' attitude towards engaging patients that we observed, and it may not necessarily be the same for all healthcare professionals, but certainly what we saw in the data is really kind of reflected quite well in this tweet from Partha Car at the bottom here. Actually, there were two posts, and there was a post here from a user called Alan, who said a group of Ds, diabetics, together is like a pack of cats and someone throws a fish in. We're always right. There's this kind of whole sense that when somebody reveals they're a patient with diabetes, everybody wants to be part of that conversation. And Partha Car, endocrinologist, comes back and says, I've noticed it makes a tricky tightrope as a healthcare professional to balance judgments on social media. So let's see what we're seeing in the conversation. We see patients who are conversing with healthcare professionals, choosing to reach out to healthcare professionals online to ask questions or to engage directly. We see healthcare professionals initiating conversation with patients, and we see healthcare professionals just reaching out more widely to patients rather than specifically to patients. So let's take a look at some of those examples. Healthcare professionals who are reaching out, patients who are reaching out to healthcare professionals here. We see somebody who is reaching out to nurses. We see somebody asking a question about insulin here, and we can see that there's a conversation that develops. We can see at the bottom there, I would really like to give blood, but being type 1 diabetes, apparently I can't. Is there any other way I can help? And some of these really do stimulate a significant response, a useful bit of support from healthcare professionals, and particularly healthcare professionals who are also patients. So Laura Ninja, who's Ninjabetic1 is her Twitter handle on the top left there, a healthcare professional who's also a patient with diabetes, and also Anne Cooper on the right hand side. We see her responding back to a user who goes by the name of Cat Lady, and she's a nurse who also is a patient with diabetes. So it's quite interesting to see that sort of support from a healthcare professional who probably has a personal connection with the disease and would have an understanding of the patient experience as well. It's quite interesting to see that the patients who have been mentioned the most by healthcare professionals here on the study. So what we did was we looked to see where it was clear that somebody who was being mentioned a lot by a healthcare professional was actually a patient, and we've tracked them on here. So we had this bad_diabetic, Liz Warren, somebody who goes by the name of Mike K. But of the top 25 Twitter accounts that were mentioned by healthcare professionals in the study, 3 of them were patients, and another 3 were both patients and healthcare professionals. I mentioned Laura Cleverly and Ann Cooper, and also this user called Chris. So there is actually, a fair bit of there. It seems that there are maybe patients who are very comfortable in the HCP patient conversation, and healthcare professionals will respond to them. Let's have a look at healthcare professionals reaching out to patients. What we see is, in a general way, at the top there, Partha Kar, reminder to all patients with diabetes. And then we see Leslie Mills underneath, a healthcare professional who's actually asking questions to patients about their use of a product. If you use Freestyle Libre, do you have to use, and then you see nothing, extra adhesive, tape, other, and so on. And so she's actually created a Twitter poll, and 33 people have responded to that to tell her about their experience of using Freestyle Libre product. Let's take a look at another section of the report here, and this is the section that says, what are healthcare professionals' thoughts on the latest technologies and advancements in diabetes, as well as some established treatments. This was a particular section of the report which was interesting to explore the conversation. This particular slide from the report tracks 2 things. First of all, on the right-hand side, it's just a broad share of voice of key sort of technologies that were being mentioned by healthcare professionals, by type of product and so on, and both branded and sort of general type of product. So we see that, interestingly, the artificial pancreas, without mention of a specific brand, made up 45% of the conversation about technologies. We see just under 500 posts talking about a particular brand or technology and so on. So it was quite interesting then to see the line on the left-hand side where we saw these spikes in conversation about artificial pancreas, and we compared that with one of the key brands that was being discussed in that conversation, which was Medtronic and its MiniMed products. Let's take a little bit more of a look at that story about that product, because it's quite interesting actually. Medtronic launched the products which healthcare professionals and others had widely been discussing as an artificial pancreas. And so we see on the top left there, hybrid closed loop system studies planned, type 1 diabetes technologies evolving, artificial pancreas in sight, and then we see a lot of optimism and sort of positivity towards the idea that there was an artificial pancreas coming. And then in the center, when Medtronic launched its 670G product, there was a number of articles that were shared by healthcare professionals saying this is very exciting, very cool. They said, now patients can use an artificial pancreas to control diabetes. And that was 28th September. But actually within just a few weeks, there was a real sort of disappointment, if you like, reflected in the healthcare professionals' conversations. The much hyped artificial pancreas leaves at least some diabetics disappointed. And then somebody else says Ash Paul says it's a letdown. And it was quite interesting to see how that conversation developed from the hype before, the excitement, to saying afterwards, not so exciting. We've done some further analysis on this story actually, and if you'd like to see that more and to find out what lessons can be learned in terms of the messaging around this, just let us know and we'll send you a link to that article, which is on our knowledge base on our website. We also looked at sort of share of voice across insulin therapies, and here you can see a sort of breakdown of sort of key insulin therapies that were being discussed in the healthcare professional conversation. Finally, although this was focused on type 1 conversations, we are picking up drug class mentions, right the way across the diabetes conversation. And so we have included these in here just to give a sense of the sort of share of voice of wider drugs being used, which would include drugs being used in the type 2 diabetes space. This particular slide is from the UK study. Now, I mentioned that what we'll do is to look at some of the top healthcare professionals that were in the conversation. First of all, let's just break it down a number of sort of interesting ways to see the top 3 contributors in the UK diabetes discussion were also the most mentioned by their peers. This is quite interesting when we think of the emergence of what we call a healthcare professional digital opinion leader, somebody who may be influencing their peers significantly or leading the view in a particular area through their online activity, that these who were most active are also most mentioned by their peers. These are just 2 measures that we'll use, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute to define who is most significant or influential. But Partha Carr, you won't be surprised because you'll have seen him referenced quite a lot in the session so far. Laura Cleverly, she's a diabetes link nurse, and Anne Cooper, who is Deputy Clinical Director and Chief Nurse now at NHS Digital. So you won't be surprised again to find out that she's very active in the online space. But you can also see that healthcare professionals are mentioning them a significant amount as well. So Anne Cooper, for example, she contributed over 1,000 mentions to this particular study's data set over the course of a year. She was mentioned by her peers more than 500 times. The top 3 roles in the conversation by the number of authors in the study were nurses first of all. So nurses were most active on type 1 diabetes in terms of the number of nurses in the conversation, not necessarily the amount of volume they posted, but the number of nurses, followed by mental health practitioners, excluding mental health nurses, and thirdly, general practitioners. So the number of specialists in the conversation was lower, although not necessarily the volume of contribution that they contributed, because we already know that Partha Carr was a very active contributor to the conversation, and he's an endocrinologist. So the top 3 UK practicing doctors in the conversation: Partha Carr, Pratik Chowdhury, and Neil Black. And you can see here their Twitter handles. If you want to go and look them up on Twitter, you can find them. And the top 3 nurses: Anne Cooper, and Laura Cleverly, and Teresa Porritt. Now, what we've done, when we map out the most significant or influential, or we sort of rank healthcare professionals, there are a number of measures that we'll use. They're mathematically defined metrics, and we can weight them in individual ways according to a particular set of business questions, things that might be most important to classify who is most significant in the conversation. Of course, those who speak the most in the conversation are not necessarily the most significant, the most trusted, the most credible, or most influential. So we're quite interested in measuring that in some way, and I'll show you the metrics that we're using. What we saw in the behaviours of the healthcare professionals who are most actively engaged online: they network with each other, they curate knowledge, and they share content. If you want to engage in the space as a healthcare professional, as a commercial company, in any kind of way, this is the behavior you will see among healthcare professionals, and it's a good behavior to mimic if you want to be part of that community. Just very briefly, and we have a whole webinar breaking down these 7 metrics, but just to give you a sense, there are 7 things that we look at. Do healthcare professionals post relevant content? Everybody in this study has done. Do they have a public versus peer following, and how important is that? Do they appear to be trusted by their peers? Are their peers mentioning them, for example? What's their role specifically? Do they have an influence on the public, not just their peers? What is their social media presence like? Which channels are they using, and so on? And something that would be important but is outside of the scope of this study is, are they in existing relationships with you? So when you're identifying your digital opinion leaders in any particular therapy area, let's take diabetes, you might be interested to focus to some extent on those who are, or you might choose to look for those who are not yet in relationships with you. So these are all factors that we can sort of focus on. So for this study, number 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 were the key ones that we've really sort of weighted our data based on to find what we'd say are the most influential UK healthcare professionals in type 1 diabetes. There's Partha Carr right at the top, and we can see a breakdown of others right the way through the data here. And we've shown 3 columns of data here: the study volume, how much they spoke about diabetes, type 1 diabetes, how many healthcare professional followers they have, and the percentage of their total followers that are healthcare professionals. So you can see some of the most engaged in the online community, in the healthcare professional community, have got about a quarter of their followers are peers, are healthcare professionals of one sort or another. I'll show you what the top 25, and we've mapped this out for UK and Spain, what their network following relationships look like just for these 25. Of course, they're followed by many, many more healthcare professionals, but you can see that those right in the center there are very well connected to their peers. Anne Cooper, Pratik Chowdhury, Partha Kar, Laura Cleverly, very, very well followed by the other key influencers in the conversation. So the arrows really sort of indicate who's following who. Whereabouts are they? We've mapped them out across the nation, so you can really see that for the UK study, they really are spread out all over. And we've just pulled out the London ones so you can see, because they wouldn't really show easily on this map. And then for Spain, we've done the same thing. So in the study report, you'll be able to spend some time studying this, having a look at these individuals, and we've profiled in detail the top 3 for each one. And again, we've mapped them out by geolocation for Spain as well. And we've just pulled out there Madrid and Barcelona, where there's quite a sort of high density of healthcare professionals in those particular cities. So the interesting behavior that we see with social media, of course, is that healthcare professionals can be anywhere. Of course, they can be anywhere in the world, although we've just looked at these as a sort of in-market study and network so easily with social media. Let's take a look at one of those healthcare professional digital opinion leaders profiles, Cristina Tejera, and she's really been actively engaged around this study following the sharing of the reports. She's also been resharing them and sort of commenting and responding as well to the data itself. And what we can do by looking at one of these healthcare professionals is we can really map out or sort of profile, if you like, their online behavior. We can find out that Cristina, she contributed in the Spain study 2,500 times. So she's talking a lot about type 1 diabetes in Spain. We can see that she has a social media presence on Twitter, she's on LinkedIn, she's on ResearchGate, which is a collaborative research sharing social platform. We can see that various other measures here. We can see how many healthcare professional followers she has. Is she listed by other people? She's been on Twitter for, at this point, when we took this, 809 days, so 2.5 years or so. And she's tweeted 17,000 times in her lifetime. For this study, we can find out which hashtags is she using, which key topics is she talking about. So we can see that she talks a lot at Congress meetings, but she's also using various other hashtags and keywords, and we can see which accounts is she mentioning, which hashtags is she using within that conversation. We can also learn about her own personal network of influence among the top 25 healthcare professionals, and that's shown here, mapped out among the 25 in Spain. We can see from this chart that she talks more about type 2 than type 1 diabetes, and we can see how her conversation volume changes over time. Certain key months, most likely when there are key events taking place, she's talking maybe twice as much as she does on an average month about type 1 diabetes. Examples of what Cristina has been sharing in the conversation here. You can see that she's retweeting Sanofi diabetes, for example. We can see that she's also sharing a lot of original thought, original content. Down here at the bottom, we see a hashtag EASD 2016. And what she's doing is she's taken looks like she's taken a photo of a slide that's being presented, and she's sharing that in a tweet. So that's a summary, if you like, of the headlines and the highlights from the study reports. Please do make sure you get access to the full report decks, which you can use as you wish, and really sort of dig deeper into them. And if you have any questions at all coming from those reports, please do get in touch and let us know. I did promise to mention something about the type 2 diabetes study, which we conducted throughout the whole of 2016. This is a commercial study available if you're interested in type 2 diabetes. We look in depth in the UK only at this stage into healthcare professionals' conversations about treatments, classes of treatments, specific areas of needs, response to clinical trial data. In fact, this is an outline of the kind of content that you'll see in here: insights for market access, insights on how healthcare professionals respond to pharmaceutical companies, engaging them. And this is a report which is provided with full written analysis of what's in the data, what this means, strategic planning notes so that you can take a view on what to do with what you've discovered in the data and so on. To give you just an example of what's in there, here we saw, and this has been anonymized, obviously the full data is in the report. We actually looked at all the products in all the classes, but just to take two of the products in SGLT2 inhibitors, quite interesting to see here, product conversation. Both these products had a lot of conversation about study and drug trial data. So there was interest among those. But when we looked to see what was in the conversation, one of them, the study and drug trial data, the healthcare professionals were really concerned about it, and the other one, they were very positive about it. In fact, the one, you can see product A here, where there was concern about the drug trial data. We also see a lot of concern about side effects, and then mentions of the FDA side effects warnings on it. Whereas on product B, quite positive response to study and drug trial data, and we see actually a positive response to safety information as well. Now, what we've done in the report is we've really analysed this in detail to see who is saying what are their concerns, and so on. Again, GLP-1 agonists, another drug class that we analysed in detail, and we've broken down attitudes towards products, we've broken down specific areas of need by products, and so on. That's just to give you a very, very brief glimpse of what's there in the type 2 diabetes study. Please do get in touch if you're interested in finding out more about that. contact@creation.co is a good email address to use to reach us. Now, finally, if this was the live webinar, we would give you an opportunity to ask questions, but what we'd like to invite you to do is to email contact@creation.co or to tweet @creation if you have questions or thoughts or responses to what you've seen here. There are many, many more ways that we can support you with bulletins, our monthly e-journal with latest research and resources provided free of charge, and other webinars. So please do keep in touch at creation.co or drop us a line. Thanks again for tuning in and watching this on-demand webinar. I really hope it was useful and look forward to hearing from you.